So Labour has announced some new proposals to revamp discrimination law. It says it's going to make it illegal to discriminate against people for racism in the workplace, especially around certain pay claims. Now, Tom, obviously a lot of people have pointed out that this is already illegal. So is Labour trying to smuggle something else in under this rubric?
It's a little
Make it make sense, please.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, because the headlines will say, they're going to introduce proper sort of equal pay for ethnic minorities, and then, Kemi Badenoch, the Equalities Minister, quite rightly said, obviously, it's already illegal to pay people differently on the basis of their ethnicity. What this does, without wanting to get too much into the weeds of it, because also what's being proposed, it hasn't been published, there's not been a lot of detail presented to the public, and also there's a lot in it from what the reporting is. But the fundamental thing is that they want to bring equal pay protections in line with ethnicity, equal pay protections and disability, incidentally, in line with gender. But it's not just about equal pay, it's about what's called equal pay for what's called equal work, which has led to a lot of quite vexing cases. Birmingham City Council has kind of bankrupted itself effectively because women who were working as, say, teaching assistants weren't receiving bonuses, but people who were working as street sweepers were receiving bonuses, and that's presented as... So you can kind of see what this is not as clear-cut as some people would understand equal pay to mean, which would be two people of two different demographics doing the same job and being paid differently. So it's introducing that, which is something which... is not a straightforwardly equalities issue, and can easily just become, as Badenoch said, a kind of bonanza for lawyers and not much else. But there's also a lot more in it. They want to introduce mandatory pay gap reporting on the basis of ethnicity, which again has existed for gender so far. Again, it's one of those things which seems likely to do nothing other than just sort of stoke resentment, because of the fact that if you introduce these kind of crude pay reporting measures, as we've done for gender, and you don't control for the age of the people that you're employing and the different levels of seniority and whatever, you can create this giant disparity which doesn't actually reflect paying men and women or black people and white people different amounts of money. So that's not necessarily good. But there's all sorts of other things in there as well. They're talking about wanting to review the curriculum. It seems like there's a decolonize the curriculum aspect to all of this. There's a lot of discussion about health disparities and whatever. So it feels like it's all of the frankly the kind of disparity always equals discrimination BLM talking points being wrapped up into one piece of legislation. So I think what we're seeing here, even though we haven't got much detail so far, is really the kind of institutionalization of woke racial politics. That's what this bill seems like it's going to represent. And I think it's telling that even that's not been enough for a lot of the activists who are already decrying it before it's even been published. It's not going far enough. So it's another reminder, I think, of the fact that whilst Keir Starmer looks incredibly boring and is incredibly boring, sort of technocratic, unprincipled kind of fellow, not unlike Biden in the US, when it comes to these issues, he's very willing to just defer to what the woke anti-racists are saying and willing to just kind of rubber stamp it and implement it. So it's another reminder of, even though we're reminded on a daily basis how dreadful the Tory party is, it's going to get a hell of a lot worse, certainly where these social issues are concerned.
And look, of course, if you challenge any of this stuff, you'll be accused of waging a culture war. Possibly you're racist as well. Why would you question what these activists want, essentially?
Yeah, I mean, I think as I understand it, the key proposal is to withdraw the need to prove direct discrimination, which at the moment is a requirement for bringing a claim under the Equality Act. You have to prove that you were directly discriminated against in some capacity. So maybe there is some there is some scope for bringing race in line with other areas where equal pay is a legal requirement. But I think Tom's right in that inevitably this will create, it's the baggage that it brings with it. This is not going to be a simple legal reform. And I think you're right that speaking up against these things can make you sound as though you're against people being paid the same irrespective of their skin color, which of course is completely ridiculous. What I think people who get involved in this area often ignore is that when you create a new law like this, it creates real potential for tension, for litigation. It creates real tension within the workplace because all these kind of unhelpful dynamics can arise as a result of the law being there and creating new ways through which people can accuse each other of things. So generally, the introduction of more laws into situations like this help nothing and can make things a lot worse. So I think it's really important that we separate out being able to critique a particular legal reform and critique the kind of baggage that it brings along with it, whilst also recognising that obviously as Tom suggested, people should not be discriminated against because of the colour of their skin.
Yeah, and Tom, obviously, Starmer likes to present himself as middle of the road on these things, but as you suggested before, it's just, it can only really get worse. Mm-hmm. But then again, what are the Tories doing to stop it?
Well, no, precisely. They've gone from. I mean, it's kind of interesting. The Tories already feel like they're kind of carping from the sidelines about these issues, even though they're actually in government. So that's, we're set for more of that when Labour come to power, of course. I think it's just really important that we really challenge this sort of disparity equals discrimination sort of discourse. First of all, because I don't think it really stacks up, and I don't think it really gets us anywhere. So, like with the example of, if you've got one group of people, whether they be women or a particular ethnic minority or whatever, and they happen to work in a certain department of a council, which for whatever reason hasn't received a bonus, whereas the street sweepers have. I imagine because of the fact that it's a bit harder to recruit street sweepers and therefore you need some more incentives. Is that decision down to some form of sexist or racist discrimination? Probably not. Should those women also get a pay rise or bonuses or whatever? I'm certainly up for that, but rather than it being a kind of question of your free choice or collective bargaining, it suddenly becomes something that has to be settled in the courts, something that has to be had out by lawyers, rather than something that is about the cut and thrust of workers' rights and pay and conditions and so on. But also because of the fact that it just invites us to constantly kind of stoke up senses of division and tensions, often on the basis of not very much. I mean, also because of the fact that there is this sort of new mantra that disparity equals discrimination, but of course it doesn't always cut the same way. The fact that, by educational attainment, white working class boys, those on free school meals, are sort of the bottom of the pile if you exclude traveller and Roma children. That's excluded from the mix. The fact that if you look at the sort of rough figures, British Chinese or British Indians are the highest earners if you break it down by ethnicity. I mean, if this is systemic racism, then it's incredibly sophisticated. It's kind of picking winners and losers almost to throw us off the scent somewhat. And I think the one thing that it completely undermines, which is why it's very telling and significant that you've got a Labour Party very much embracing this, is because of the fact that, again, it completely elides class as a fundamental distinction here. I mean, we can go blue in the face trading statistics about what group is more likely to earn a certain amount or to end up in social housing or to face certain health problems on the rest of the population. One thing they're almost certainly going to have in common is that they're either poor or working class. That's something which cuts across all of those other divides. And often a lot of these disparities, when you control for age or geography or background or whatever, a lot of these gaps tend to shrink to almost nothing anyway. And I just find it really interesting that it's become so fundamental now to any, not just left-wing, but left-of-centre politics, to obsess over these issues but ignore the fundamental one, which is the question of social class and that level of inequality. I mean, it's worth remembering that there is no pay gap on the minimum wage, but there seems to be something which completely eludes them. And obviously, there's so much diversity, if you like, within specific populations in terms of how much they earn and therefore what social inequities or what problems they tend to confront in life. The fact that that's become not just quite a sort of radical proposition to bring that up, but it's actually something that gets you shouted down, gets you accused of being some sort of class reductionist, gets you accused of being obsessed about the white working class to the exclusion of all others, when that's not what anyone is saying in this debate, I think is really telling about how identity politics has just completely crowded out class politics now, even in the supposed party of the working class, it seems like.